All right. So this gong is to bring about world peace, right? We're
Yeah,
hoping that
it's kind
we're
of
hoping that our
frequency,
actions.
ripple effect.
Yeah. So today we're just going to do an update on what's going on in the geopolitical situation
Great.
today.
Yeah.
Right. There's been a lot going on in the and for those of who saw my last show, I had predicted this split between Trump and Netanyahu,
That's
and
right.
now it's actually coming true today.
What?
So just recently, Trump went to Saudi Arabia and tried to convince them to join the Abraham Accords.
Hmm.
Okay, so are you familiar? Basically, what that's doing is it would be forcing Israel to recognize the state of Palestine, to recognize the two-state solution.
Got it.
Basically, Israel would have to stand in line and follow orders from the UN,
Hmm.
and they don't. Netanyahu will not agree to that at all.
How will that work with Palestine? I mean, how will it work with the people from that camp? Are they willing to do it as well? Is it Netanyahu and them both disagreeing? They don't want a two-state, or is it
Okay,
like, you know,
so in the past, at the UN meetings, whenever certain countries try to push Israel into following the UN law, then the US just vetoes it. That's
mhm.
the situation which has always been there. The US has always been the veto power to remove any conditions against Israel. But
Mhm.
now maybe Trump has the power to stop that veto, which means that Israel would have to obey the UN. The thing is this, all over the newspapers now, all the newspapers are saying Trump has cut ties with Netanyahu. I don't know what that really means. I don't think that he can actually just completely ignore
No.
him, although that this is what the rumors are.
Is he communicating with anybody else in Israel that has a charge? Like has
No, but let me answer that question. There is a opposition party to Netanyahu. Within the Israeli Knesset are
right.
several major parties, but the number one party, of course, is Netanyahu's party, the Likud party, and then there is the opposition party. And the leader of the opposition party, just a few days ago, told Netanyahu, you better listen to Trump. Okay. And if Trump tells you to stop attacking Gaza, you better stop attacking Gaza. So the
Right.
thing is this, I'm not 100% sure if this so-called opposition party is truly opposition or whether it's a controlled opposition party.
Hmm.
We talked about this in the past. There's
Yeah.
many opposition parties, and some of them are controlled opposition parties, and some of them are real opposition parties.
Hmm.
So the main opposition party, I'm a little bit skeptical whether it's actually just a controlled opposition.
Yeah.
But regardless, at least they're saying the right things. They're saying you have to get in line. So maybe that Trump does have some actual allies in the Israeli Knesset. Question is there hope for maybe you can say what comes after Netanyahu? Is there hope for Israel
Right.
as what comes
So,
after?
so what you were saying was that Trump was talking to the Saudi Arabian uh, leader, and they
Right,
were
he's in
trying to
Saudi
get
Arabia
him to
now, trying to convince
convince.
the prince to join the Abraham Accords,
So
which
that
would
would give
then mean Israel has to recognize the state of Palestine. Right now, Israel says no, there is no state of Palestine. We don't recognize them, and as long as Netanyahu is in power, that they're not going to do that.
Hmm.
So now the thing is this: for so many years, Saudi Arabia has not recognized the Abraham Accords. The reason is because Saudi Arabia is a puppet of Israel. The same people who controlled Netanyahu also could have been controlling Saudi Arabia for a long, long time.
And who
For
would you say these people are? Do you want to mention it or no?
Yeah, we should mention that. So to, before I get into that, I want to say what I think is what's going on here now.
Yeah.
What I think is going on here now is the second collapse of the Illuminati. Okay?
Ah,
What I mean to say is the first Illuminati lasted from the year 1118 until the year 1307. That was called the Knights Templar.
mhm.
Okay, the Knights Templar were some French knights who learned about the secrets of the Kabbalah, and they started working together with these Jewish moneylenders. So the Knights Templar, there was the Crusades going on, and the Crusaders would go down and they would deposit their money in the Knights Templar Bank. And the Knights Templar were building castles. And for 200 years, the Knights Templar was the Illuminati back then, right? But then in the year 1307, the King of France shut down the Knights Templar, right? So that was the first collapse of the first Illuminati. Now we're living in the period of the second Illuminati. And the second Illuminati began in the year 1782. That's the year when the Freemasons joined back together with these Jewish moneylenders again. So this has been the Illuminati we've been living under for the past 300 years. Okay.
Interesting. So they're similar roots to them, meaning
It
same roots.
Yeah, what it is the Illuminati means there's an agreement between the Freemasons and the Zionists.
Uh-huh.
Okay, when these two can work together, that's called an Illuminati, right?
Oh, I see. That's interesting.
Right. So from the year 1307, the Freemasons split themselves from these Jewish moneylenders. But then they joined back together in the year 1782, right? And
Is this the
that's
original Khazarian from the Khazars?
right. So that when you talk about the Jewish moneylenders, we're talking about Ashkenazis that have been living in Europe for the past 1,000 years. These were the Jewish moneylenders.
Hmm.
And so the question is, were they working together with these Freemasons or not, right? So in the days of the Knights Templar, 1,000 years ago, that's why the Knights Templar were so powerful, is because they had an agreement with these Jewish moneylenders. And all the cities where the Knights Templar built castles were the same cities where the Jewish moneylenders had been setting up their little villages, right? So maybe we can do a later show about that, but I can go through the history of the Knights Templar and where they built their castles and how they cooperated with these Jewish moneylenders. But that's history. That collapsed in the year 13. Yeah.
Okay, God, I don't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to interject a little. Um, the Knights Templar, is that related to a Christian organization?
Well, at the time they considered themselves Christian. They had permission from the Pope to go on the Crusades, but
Right. They were like killing people that were like not believing in Jesus or something?
right. So they were the army which supported the Crusaders who wanted to go settle in Palestine,
So
Christian.
extreme. Yeah.
But they were more than that.
Okay.
They were soldiers, they're
Right. Of
Christian
course.
protecting the Crusaders, but they were bankers.
Um,
And the Vatican, the Pope granted them permission to charge interest on the loans, which was against the church law at the time. That was called usury. Christians were not allowed to engage in usury. But the Knights Templar found a loophole in that, which was, we're not charging interest on loans, we're charging deposit on the safe deposit boxes. Okay, so you can deposit your wealth in our safe deposit boxes, and we can charge interest on that. So this was a loophole that allowed the Knights Templar were the first Christians to do usury and to loan money and to take interest on these, even though it was against church law at the time.
Got it.
So, they were the Jewish people living in Europe at that time were allowed to charge interest on loans because they weren't Christians. Christian law said Christians are not allowed to charge interest on loans, but Jewish people can charge interest on loans. So that's why they were the Jewish moneylenders, because the church had given them permission to give loans to the Christians.
Got it.
You know, and
Yeah,
so
I'm just like fascinated by the idea that the Khazarians, I bring back them, that they weren't really Jewish,
right.
but they called themselves Jews, and then they became the Jewish moneylender or the Jewish whatever you're talking about. Correct?
Yeah. So if in fact there's a Wikipedia page, it's called Court Jew. That's the official name. It means these Jewish people got into the courts of the European kings and starting loaning money to these kings, you know. So that's why they were called the Court Jews. They had come from Khazaria. So the kingdom of Khazaria had collapsed in the year 969 when the Rus, the Russians, you know, invaded Khazaria and basically ended their empire, yeah. And so then they settled into a region which was known at that time as the Kievian Rus. That was the Russian kingdom was based in Kiev at that time. So when the Kievian Rus invaded Khazaria and conquered them, the Khazarian people then migrated into this area called the Kievian Rus, which includes Poland and Ukraine and so now if you go to Wikipedia and you type the words "the Pale of Settlement," it's mostly Poland and Ukraine, but it also includes part of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, this Eastern Europe, okay? This former Soviet area. So that at that time, you know, like 1,000 years ago, that area was called the Kievian Rus. They were Russian people whose headquarters was in Kiev. Okay.
Talking about 900 AD or something like that?
Yeah. So when the Kievian Rus invaded Khazaria, the Khazarian lost their empire and they migrated into this area, which is known today as the Pale of Settlement. Okay, if you just search that word, the Pale of Settlement. Now, this is where Wikipedia is a little bit strange because the name is called the Pale of Settlement, but that implies that somebody settled there. But who settled there, right? That's where they don't want to say who settled there. It was the Jewish people, the Ashkenazi, and they came from Khazaria. That's why it's called settlement, because after they lost their homeland of Khazaria, they settled in this Pale of Settlement.
And you say right? The Jewish people, was it the Jewish people?
No, these are white-skinned Jews. They were converts, yeah? They had converted to Judaism around the year 740 AD. And we can
Right.
prove that because there's a Khazarian coins. Now, the Khazarian people, they had their own religion before converting to Judaism. And
Right.
that religion is known as Tengriism. It's a kind of a Mogul shamanism. It's these are desert people, right? It was called the Turk Khaganate. In the plains between Russia and China, the steppes, there was all these Turk Khaganates. They were these people that were fighting each other, and eventually from that, the Khazarians became the leading Khaganate of all these Turks. Okay,
Turks.
so this is where the Khazarians came from. This Turk Khaganate.
Why is it
And
called Turk?
the Turk people. It's
Not Turkish?
not Turkish. No, I mean it's began. The plains start from Turkey and they go to Mongolia, right?
Right.
So it's a long stretch of land that goes all the way between China and Russia. These people had lost their homeland in 969, and then they settled down in this Pale of Settlement and eventually moved into Eastern Europe and became the court Jews, the moneylenders of
Yeah.
Europe.
And then what was the main point that you want to get to?
So they had made their first deal with the Knights Templar in the 1100,
Hmm.
but then that deal broke in the 1300.
Right.
And then later in 1782 was when Adam Weishaupt created the new Illuminati, and that's when these Ashkenazi Jewish moneylenders started working together with the Knights. Well, the Knights Templar changed their names and they just became known as the Freemasons,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah, that's interesting to tie that together. 'Cause I didn't know the actual roots of it in that sense. I understood a little bit of that, but not the way you're explaining it. So that's pretty interesting.
All right, so I was talking about the second collapse of the Illuminati. That's
Yes.
what I see is going on today. Yes?
Gotcha.
So the first collapse happened in the year 1307. That's when the King of France broke apart the Knights Templar, and in doing so, he broke the connection between the Freemasons and these Jewish moneylenders. So that ended the Knights
Is there a
Templar.
reason why he did that?
Yeah, they had become more powerful than the king. The Knights Templar, they had built this trade network in all these castles in all these cities, and the traders, the Jewish moneylenders, were also helping them. So the first Illuminati collapsed in the year 1307, but then they came back in the year 1782, and this was called the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. That's when they formed again. So we can go into that later. That's another big subject.
Congress of Wilhelmsbad.
Yeah, in Germany. They actually built a pyramid at this castle, Hessian dynasty. So you can search this pyramid at Wilhelmsbad. They built this pyramid to celebrate this completion of the Illuminati in the year 1782. And this is also why the year 1782 is on the dollar bill. The pyramid on the dollar bill has the MCX, blah, 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 the Roman letter of the year 1782.
Where was the pyramid built? In France or somewhere
In
else?
Germany.
Germany.
Yeah, it's called Wilhelmsbad, Germany.
Was it big?
No, it's a small pyramid, but it's more of a symbolic thing.
Still existing?
Yeah, you can go there today. The important thing about this pyramid is that they completed the capstone. Like
Hmm.
on the dollar bill, the capstone is floating in the air. It hasn't been completed yet,
Oh,
but
gotcha.
they built the capstone in the year 1782 because that's when the Illuminati was finally successful in making this business partnership with the Jewish moneylenders. Okay,
Right.
so that was, and it was, so then America declared their independence, and um, England stopped their war with America because America had already established their private central bank.
Hmm.
So America got their first private central bank in the year 1782, same year that the Illuminati was formed, and
So that
that's
was
the
like
same year that
years.
the British decided to stop the war because it was the same Freemasons, the same central bank. There was no difference between England and America at that time, you know.
Right. So yeah, because like 1776 was kind of like the establishment of America, right?
Right. So at the beginning, the American, even though the Americans were originally Freemasons, they still wanted to be free from England,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
But once they got a private central bank in 82, then they were the same as England. It was the private
Right.
central bank of England became the private central bank of America. So there was no difference between the Freemasons of America and the Freemasons of England at that time.
Is it true that in the presidency in America that they always had some kind of clause in there that was governed by the Queen?
No, but I think that the clause is that America should have a private the the America can have a private central bank, and the private central bank uh, will be set for a certain number of years. They have to renew it every certain number of years. So they had like the first private central bank, the second private central bank, and then eventually. But yeah, but that essentially means it's no different from England, right? And it also essentially means they're no different from the Netherlands because the Bank of England was just a copy paste of the Bank of Amsterdam, right?
I, right.
That's where it all began. Actually, was in Amsterdam. So,
Wow.
so anyway,
So you were mentioning the fall of the Illuminati is currently happening.
I believe so because what's happening is um, now. Okay, first of all, Netanyahu is the instrument of these Illuminati now. You know,
Mhm.
their
Right.
goal is this greater Israel project. They want to have perpetual war, perpetual bloodshed, because they believe that war and bloodshed will help usher in the return of the Messiah. This is a messianic Zionism. They believe that well, there's different branches of messianic Zionism, but this one, the Illuminati, are believing that war and bloodshed will help usher in the return of the Messiah. This is
Well, what Messiah are they talking about?
yeah. So this is the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. It's called the book of Isaiah. The
Right.
book of Isaiah is the book that's prophesizing the return of the Messiah. And for these Illuminati, um, their interpretation of the book of Isaiah means that when the earth is covered with war and bloodshed, then the Messiah will return. That's their interpretation of the
Right. So
book of
they're like
Isaiah.
actually trying to manifest that.
They're trying to manifest that by keeping perpetual warfare. Okay? And so that's why Netanyahu cannot recognize the two-state solution and cannot recognize the UN and the 1967 borders because that would put an end to their perpetual warfare. Right? So So that's why. The, so this is why. So coming back to this Illuminati. So the Illuminati began in this current day Illuminati began in the year 1782 at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad.
In Germany.
Yeah, in Germany. And they had also created what's known as the House of Saud, Saudi Arabia. These rich sheiks are actually Illuminati members who've
Oh.
been puppets of the Illuminati for over 300 years.
Hmm.
Okay. But just today, Trump is in Saudi Arabia talking to this prince, and he's trying to convince the prince to join the Abraham Accord. And if that actually happens, that would be the end of Israel, basically, because that means that their puppet has now switched sides on them and turned against them.
Yeah, it
Okay.
seems there's a shift going on, isn't there?
Yeah, this is the
I
thing.
mean,
So
for the Saudi Arabian, I mean, for them to shift their thinking from being,
from being puppets to being against their puppet master.
yeah, yeah, there's something's going on that's shifting that whole thing.
Yeah, and actually, that shift actually began in 2023
Right.
because at the end of COVID, China convinced Saudi Arabia to make diplomatic relations with Iran.
Hmm.
So ever since the Illuminati, Saudi Arabia was a puppet of Israel, and they were vehemently opposed to Iran. You know, it's not just a Sunni Shia thing. This is a much deeper thing. Okay, this
Right.
is a puppet show going on. Okay, so if Trump can actually change that, if he can convince Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accord, it means to recognize the two-state solution, then
Hmm.
their puppet turns against them.
Right.
Then Israel would be all alone.
Hmm.
So apparently, some other things that are really important going on is so Trump just signed this deal with Qatar, and then supposedly uh, Trump's advisors met with Iran and had their fourth round of talks on the nuclear deal. They're trying to make a nuclear deal where America will allow Iran to have nuclear as long as it's not weapons grade nuclear,
Right.
right?
So just power, just for power, right?
Yeah, well, not so much for power, even other uses like medical uses and things like that.
Uh-huh.
It's even less than that. So, and then also we have this new president of Syria. Okay, and
Hmm.
Trump in just yesterday, Trump said we're thinking about giving him tariff breaks because now is the time to help out Syria, because apparently this new president is a good guy, a guy who they can work with.
Okay.
So we've got all these positive things going on, like Hamas gave back the final American hostage,
Mm, yeah.
right? And then Iran sat down to the table. The UAE sat down. So UAE also is very happy with what's going on. And Qatar signed a deal, and Syria signed a deal. The only thing which hasn't happened yet is Saudi Arabia hasn't actually signed the Abraham Accords yet. that would be that would be the end of the game for Israel if that actually happened. So in the end, you
Do you
have.
think you think it's possible that there's going to be a new Israel?
Well, that's the thing is, if you can get rid of Netanyahu and find a proper, leader for Israel. I don't know if it's this opposition party we have now, or whether a second real opposition party will come in. But either
Yeah.
way, anyway, as long as they get rid of Netanyahu and have a new kind of government, that could possibly bring about an end to the war. Yeah,
Right.
because right now Netanyahu and this Likud party are the war party. They want perpetual warfare. They want perpetual bloodshed.
Mhm.
And so behind all this, I have to mention China, because China is the one. Just a few days ago, Trump announced we've got a trade deal with China now.
Yeah, I remember. I saw that. They both
And
lowered the tariffs, right? Kind of like Trump came in with a big number, and then they both
right,
went down, right?
right, but the whole thing is this. See, the thing which people don't realize is that it has nothing to do with tariffs and this number, that number. It has to do with Israel. And it has to do with Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. Okay? So, for a long time, China has been trying to convince Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. Right?
Uh-huh.
And for a long time, China has been friends with the UAE and friends with the Qatar, and for a long time, uh, China has been trying to create peace between Yemen and Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
So this has been China has been going on for a long time, and so when you talk about China and Trump making a trade deal, what you really mean is they're trying to make an agreement on what's going to happen in the Middle East, because these numbers, is it a 145% or what? That doesn't matter, because it's like give or take a little. China's
Are you
importing
saying that
things from America.
that's just the instrument? You're saying that's the instrument to get the talks going?
Right. If they can. So China has been telling Trump. Trump just came to Saudi Arabia. So, okay, Saudi Arabia, please sign the Abraham Accords. And China saying, we've been saying that for a long time. You're nothing new here. So it's like China's been trying to create peace in the area for a long time. And that
Hmm.
they know that the way to do that is through Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is the number one puppet of Israel. So if you can create peace in Saudi Arabia, then Israel will have to follow along. So this is what China's been doing for a long,
You think
long
you
time.
think Saudi Arabia is the puppet of Israel?
Yeah, for
How's that?
300 years. Because like I said, when the Illuminati was created 300 years ago,
Uh-huh.
360 years ago, then that was the House of Saud, were originally they were called the Turkish Danme. The word Danme is crypto Jews. It means Jewish people who are pretending to be Muslims.
Right.
So this has been going on for over 300, almost 400 years now, that you have these crypto Jews who are actually Jewish people who dress up like Muslims, pretend to be
Wow.
Muslims.
Oh my
so
God.
so
So
this
bizarre.
this has been going on for a
I,
long
I,
time.
I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm awestruck because, I would never guess, 'cause it's so funny because here you got the Arabs and the Jews fighting each other supposedly, and yet they're sharing something so similar. Like, you always hear the Arabs hate the Jews and blah blah blah, you know?
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to think about it. You've got these rich sheiks, rich oil sheiks from Saudi Arabia. Where do you think they get their money from? You know, Have you ever seen these guys? They like they have like a gold plated car, and they wash their car with dollar bills and throw it away, and they
From oil, right?
yeah, they for them money is nothing. These but the reason they're allowed to accumulate such money is because their connections to Israel.
And when you say Israel, you're talking about the Rothschilds and this type of puppet above the government and above the powers of the Illuminati.
Right. So that's it. It's been you talking about these ancient Jewish moneylenders who've been, there in Europe for like nearly 1,000 years, and so it was because of the Dutch East India Company was when these first private central bankers, okay, 400 years ago, the Dutch East India Company created the first private central bank of the world. And from that came the Rothschilds.
Hmm.
But the Rothschilds didn't mean anything until the year 1782 and the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. And that's when these Freemasons and these Jewish moneylenders came together, right? So this
Yeah.
is the Illuminati today, which has been going on since 1782. And that's
And
why
then,
we hope that what we're doing today will help bring about this end to this Illuminati and this end to this perpetual warfare.
yeah, that would be amazing.